According to Dr. Zakir Naik, the world's most famous fake debater, Muhammad was both a homosexual and a necrophile. A necrophile is someone who's sexually attracted to dead people. So, where does Dr. Naik assert that Muhammad was a gay necrophile? Well, he tells us that Muhammad was a homosexual and that he was attracted to dead women when he claims that Muhammad is mentioned by name in Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 16.
Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is also mentioned by name in the Old Testament. It's mentioned in the Song of Solomon, chapter number 5, verse number 16.
Now, this is an interesting place for Dr. Naik to find a prophecy about Muhammad. Song of Solomon is a short poetic book about a loving, physical, sexual relationship between Solomon and his bride. Some Muslims claim that this book can't be the Word of God because of the way Solomon and his bride talk about each other's bodies. For instance, in chapter 7, verses 1 through 3, Solomon says to his bride, "How beautiful your sandaled feet, O prince's daughter! Your graceful legs are like jewels, the work of an artist's hands. Your navel is a rounded goblet that never lacks blended wine. Your waist is a mound of wheat encircled by lilies. Your breasts are like two fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle." Solomon goes on and on praising her body, and yet Dr. Zakir Naik goes to this book to find a prophecy about Muhammad. But let's turn to chapter 5, which supposedly mentions Muhammad by name. In the first verse of chapter 5, Solomon says, "I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk." Notice that Solomon talks about drinking wine. And yet, Dr. Zakir Naik goes to this chapter to find a prophecy about Muhammad. Let's read the so-called prophecy in context. In verse 8, Solomon's bride says to her friends, "Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, if you find my beloved, what will you tell him? Tell him I am faint with love." Her friends respond in verse 9 by asking her, "How is your beloved better than others, most beautiful of women? How is your beloved better than others, that you so charge us?" So the women of Jerusalem ask Solomon's bride why she thinks that her husband, Solomon, is so much better than other men. She answers them in verses 10 through 16. Let's read the passage and see if we can spot the prophecy about Muhammad. Solomon's bride says, "My beloved is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. His head is purest gold. His hair is wavy and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by the water streams, washed in milk, mounted like jewels. His cheeks are like beds of spice yielding perfume. His lips are like lilies dripping with myrrh. His arms are rods of gold set with topaz. His body is like polished ivory decorated with lapis lazuli. His legs are pillars of marble set on bases of pure gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as its cedars. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. This is my beloved. This is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem." Verse 16, according to Dr. Zakir Naik, is actually about Muhammad. Why? Because the Hebrew for lovely is Mahmadim. Mahmadim kind of sounds like Muhammad, so the verse is actually saying, his mouth is sweetness itself, he is altogether Muhammad. This is my beloved, this is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem.
In Hebrew, I will say, it says, Hikko mamitakim vikullu Muhammadim zaidudi zairai baina Jerusalem. He is most sweet. He's altogether lovely. He's my beloved. He's my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. Here, the name of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is there. It says Muhammadim.
Now, translating this verse as his mouth is sweetness itself, he is altogether Muhammad, is hilarious for all kinds of reasons. Dr. Naik has to explain why the Hebrew suffix im is used. The suffix im is added to form the plural in Hebrew. So why does the verse say Mahmadim, which would be plural, i.e. Muhammad's, rather than just Mahmad, the singular, i.e. Muhammad? This is where desperate Muslim apologists spread their nonsense about the plural of respect.
In the Hebrew and Semitic languages, when we want to give respect to someone, we add im to it. So to the name of Muhammad is added im, it becomes Muhammadim. And they've translated into altogether lovely. But the original name of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is there in the Old Testament, Song of Solomon, chapter number 5, verse number 16.
The problem, of course, is that there is no plural of respect in Hebrew. In the Old Testament, we never find Noah, Abraham, Moses, or David being referred to as Noah's, Abraham's, Moses's, or David's to show respect to these prophets. So why would this plural of respect only be used in Song of Solomon 5:16? In Hebrew, the plural actually makes perfect sense here because altogether lovely is referring to all of the parts of Solomon's body that the bride just described. Remember, she just talked about his head, his hair, his eyes, his cheeks, his lips, his arms, his body, his legs, and his mouth. All of him, all of these parts that make up Solomon are lovely. So the plural is used. He is altogether lovely, head to toe. We could also point out that Dr. Naik commits what's called the phonic fallacy here. You commit the phonic fallacy when you say that two words in two different languages sound alike and therefore mean the same thing. Hebrew and Arabic are different languages. Dr. Naik thinks that since the word Mahmad sounds like the word Muhammad, it's really the same word. If that's Dr. Naik's theory of language, we can prove all kinds of things about Islam. For example, many Muslims say Allahu Akbar in various situations. Some of the Muslims in the audience even yell Allahu Akbar when Zakir Naik claims that Muhammad is mentioned by name in the Song of Solomon.
Song of Solomon, chapter number 5, verse number 16. Hikko mamitakim vikullu Muhammadim zaidudi zairai baina Jerusalem.
Now, in Arabic, Allahu Akbar means God is greater. But since Dr. Naik believes that Hebrew and Arabic words that sound alike are really the same word, we can finally understand what Muslims are saying when they shout Allahu Akbar. In Hebrew, the word Akbar means mouse. So, when Muslims say Allahu Akbar, they're really saying Allah is a mouse. Zakir Naik used the phonic fallacy to show that Muhammad is mentioned in Song of Solomon 5:16, and his fans responded by shouting, Allah is a mouse. Those are the kinds of things we would normally point out to demonstrate the absurdity of translating the Hebrew word Mahmad, meaning lovely or cherished or pleasing, as Muhammad. But I'm feeling generous today, so I'm going to grant everything Dr. Zakir Naik says here. I'm going to grant that the word Mahmad is actually Muhammad, and that Solomon's wife mentions Muhammad by name in Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 16. I can't be more generous than that, right? So, Muhammad is mentioned by name in Song of Solomon. Now let's think about the implications of Dr. Naik's claims. First, this is Solomon's bride talking. So if Solomon's bride is delivering a prophecy about Muhammad, then Solomon's bride is a prophet, according to Dr. Zakir Naik. Second, as we've seen, she's praising a man's body here. This makes perfect sense if she's talking about Solomon, but since Dr. Naik insists that she's talking about Muhammad, he's accusing Solomon's bride of lusting after another man, Muhammad, in a vision given to her by God. Third, if verse 16 is about Muhammad, then Solomon's wife calls Muhammad her beloved. But in chapter 7, verse 10, she says, I belong to my beloved, and his desire is for me. The desire of her beloved is for her. Remind me, who is her beloved, according to Dr. Naik? Her beloved is Muhammad, which means that Muhammad's desire was for Solomon's bride. Since the kind of desire being discussed in Song of Solomon is sexual desire, Muhammad's sexual desire was for Solomon's bride, a woman who had been dead for 15 centuries when Muhammad was desiring her. What do we call a man who lusts after a dead woman? We call him a necrophile. Muhammad, according to Dr. Zakir Naik, was a necrophile. But we can learn even more about Muhammad from Dr. Naik's scandalous translation of Mahmud, because Mahmud is used in many places in the Old Testament. Obviously, if we're going to say that the Hebrew word Mahmud is simply the name Muhammad, we need to be consistent and say that wherever the word Mahmud is used, it's referring to Muhammad. Let's look at a couple of verses that use the word Mahmud and see what happens if we take Dr. Naik's advice and translate the word as Muhammad. In Ezekiel 24:16, God refers to Ezekiel's wife as the delight of Ezekiel's eyes. But the word delight here in Hebrew is Mahmad. According to Dr. Naik, however, the Hebrew word Mahmad shouldn't be translated as delight or lovely because it's a name, the name Muhammad. And if Mahmad means Muhammad and Ezekiel's wife was Mahmad, then Muhammad was Ezekiel's wife. Hence, Muhammad was in a gay marriage with another prophet. And Muhammad was the wife in that relationship. Ezekiel was the man. Muhammad was the wife. Draw your own conclusions there, Muslims. Just 5 verses later in Ezekiel, God tells the children of Israel that Jerusalem will be conquered and that the temple will be destroyed. He says in Ezekiel 24:21, I am about to desecrate my sanctuary, the stronghold in which you take pride, the delight of your eyes. The word delight here is once again Mahmad. But Dr. Naik claims that Mahmad means Muhammad, not delight. So, in this verse, according to Dr. Naik, God tells the children of Israel not that he's going to desecrate the delight of their eyes. He tells the children of Israel that he's going to desecrate Muhammad. Now, this is usually the point in the conversation when some disgruntled Muslim threatens to chop my head off and rape my wife for pointing out the obvious. David Wood says that our prophet was a homosexual and a necrophile. I'm going to threaten him because keyboard threats have done such a great job silencing him in the past. Let's be clear here, my Muslim friends. Go through my videos and you'll quickly realize that I'm quite happy saying whatever I feel like saying about your fake prophet. But right now, I'm not the one who's saying that Muhammad was a gay necrophile. Dr. Zakir Naik is the one who's saying it. All I've done is go along with what your favorite apologist says. Dr. Naik claims that Muhammad is mentioned by name in Song of Solomon 5:16 and that the word Mahmad refers to Muhammad. And the Muslims in the audience cheered by calling Allah a mouse. Unfortunately for Dr. Naik, even if we agree with everything he says about Song of Solomon 5:16, it tells us absolutely nothing about whether Muhammad was a prophet because the passage doesn't say anything about the woman's beloved being a prophet. But Song of Solomon does say that the woman's beloved desired her, which means that Muhammad desired a dead woman. Not according to me, according to Dr. Zakir Naik. And the Bible declares that Ezekiel's wife was Muhammad and that God promised to desecrate Muhammad, again, not according to me, according to Dr. Zakir Naik. So, our Muslim friends are faced with quite a dilemma, because there are only 2 possibilities here. Either Muhammad was a homosexual and a necrophile, who was utterly desecrated by God, Or Dr. Naik is a total moron who's guilty of deceiving his ignorant fans who are too gullible to realize that he has no clue what he's talking about. Which is it? Muslims? Was Muhammad a gay necrophile, or is Dr. Naik a clueless deceiver? It's one or the other, and I'm quite happy with whichever alternative you choose. But for you Muslims who agree with Dr. Naik that God promised to desecrate your homosexual necrophilic prophet, I should note that you do have some additional evidence for your position. After all, how could God desecrate and degrade and humiliate Muhammad any more thoroughly than by making Muhammad's most popular defender someone like Dr. Zakir Naik? Having Dr. Naik as your chief apologist. Now that is the ultimate desecration. Zakir Naik, like his mentor in deception, Ahmed Deedat, before him, has built his career on the colossal ignorance of his followers. Naik knows that when he speaks, he's speaking to a room full of Muslims who've never studied the Quran or the Bible, and who therefore won't be able to recognize when he's lying to them about the Quran or the Bible. The staggering stupidity of Naik's fans thus allows him to say whatever he wants, no matter how ridiculous, and the crowd will praise Allah for the lies they've been told. Unfortunately for Naik and his freakishly foolish followers, there are people like me who have studied the Quran and the Bible and who therefore know exactly when he's lying. The fun part is that Naik is so incredibly sloppy when he starts lying, he always ends up accidentally giving us yet another way to prove that Muhammad was a false prophet. Take Naik's claim that there's a prophecy about Muhammad in Isaiah 29:12. Unlike Zakir Naik, I want all of my viewers to know exactly what this passage is saying, so before we examine Naik's comments, let's read the passage. In Isaiah 29, God tells the people of Jerusalem that he's going to punish them for their rebellion. He calls Jerusalem Ariel. Ariel sounds like the Hebrew for altar hearth of God. We'll see why in a moment. Beginning in verse 1. Woe to you, Ariel, Ariel, the city where David settled. Add year to year, and let your cycle of festivals go on. Yet I will besiege Ariel. She will mourn and lament. She will be to me like an altar hearth. Jerusalem will be like an altar hearth, the place where everything burns. Hence, Ariel. I will encamp against you on all sides. I will encircle you with towers, and set up my siege works against you. This was fulfilled when the Assyrians came against the city in 701 BC, and again when the Babylonians invaded in 586 BC. Brought low, you will speak from the ground. Your speech will mumble out of the dust. Your voice will come ghost-like from the earth. Out of the dust, your speech will whisper. So God's going to punish Jerusalem. What's he going to do after he punishes Jerusalem? He's going to punish Jerusalem's enemies because they're under God's judgment too. Verse 5. But your many enemies will become like fine dust, the ruthless hordes like blown chaff. Suddenly, in an instant, the Lord Almighty will come with thunder and earthquake and great noise, with windstorm and tempest and flames of a devouring fire. Then the hordes of all the nations that fight against Ariel, that attack her and her fortress and besiege her, will be as it is with a dream, with a vision in the night, as when a hungry person dreams of eating, but awakens hungry still, as when a thirsty person dreams of drinking, but awakens faint and thirsty still. In other words, as Jerusalem's enemies rejoice over their victory, God's suddenly going to bring them back to reality, like waking someone from a dream. So will it be with the hordes of all the nations that fight against Mount Zion. Now, God has told them exactly what's going to happen. Why can't the people of Jerusalem see what's coming? They can't see what's coming because they have become spiritually blind and can no longer understand or accept God's revelations. God says in verse 9, "Be stunned and amazed, blind yourselves and be sightless, be drunk, but not from wine, stagger, but not from beer. The Lord has brought over you a deep sleep. He has sealed your eyes, the prophets. He has covered your heads, the seers. For you, i.e., the Jews of Jerusalem, this whole vision," what vision? The vision about Jerusalem being punished. "This whole vision is nothing but words sealed in a scroll. And if you give the scroll," about God's judgment against the people of Jerusalem, "to someone who can read and say, 'Read this, please,' they will answer, 'I can't. It is sealed.' They'll make an excuse for why they won't listen to the warning about God's judgment. Or if you give the scroll to someone who cannot read and say, 'Read this, please,' they will answer, 'I don't know how to read.' Once again, they'll make an excuse for rejecting the warning." So this is a pretty straightforward passage. God says that he's going to punish Jerusalem. Then he's going to punish Jerusalem's enemies. Then he explains why the people of Jerusalem can't understand the vision. They've become spiritually blind. And when God tells them what he's going to do, they make excuses for rejecting his warnings. There are two kinds of people, literate and illiterate. If you give the revelation to someone who can read, he'll say, "I can't read it, it's sealed." If you give it to someone who can't read, he'll say, "I can't read." Either way, people reject the message. Pretty clear, right? Not if you're Zakir Naik. If you're Zakir Naik and you read verse 12, where the spiritually blind people of Jerusalem make excuses for why they reject God's revelations, you somehow conclude that this passage is about Muhammad. It's kind of ironic that when Zakir Naik reads a passage about spiritual blindness and the inability to understand a simple message from God, Zakir Naik shows that he's spiritually blind and can't understand a simple message from God.
It's mentioned in the book of Isaiah, chapter number 29, verse number 12, that the book shall be given to the prophet, and it will be said, "Read, I pray thee," and he will say, "I am not learned."
Notice that Zakir Naik can't even quote the verse without lying about it. He claims that the verse says, "The book shall be given to the prophet."
That the book shall be given to the prophet. That the book shall be given to the prophet. That the book shall be given to the prophet.
Here's verse 12 again. Anything about the book being given to a prophet here? No, God tells the people of Jerusalem that to them, the vision about God's judgment on their city is like a scroll, and they make excuses for rejecting it. The passage says absolutely nothing about a prophet being given a book or a scroll. So why does Zakir Naik lie by telling his fans that the verse includes the word prophet? He lies because he's Zakir Naik, and that's just what Zakir Naik does. And that's what he has to do if he wants to make this passage sound like it's talking about a prophet and not about spiritually blind people stubbornly refusing to accept God's warnings. But why should we think that this is a prophecy about Muhammad?
And when Archangel Gabriel, Jibril alayhi salam, when he told to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ikra," the Prophet replied, "Ma ana biqari," I am not learned. Exact fulfillment of the prophecy of the book of Isaiah, chapter number 29, verse number 12.
So according to Zakir Naik, when verse 12 says that someone will be given a scroll or a book, the book in question is the Quran. But what's in the scroll according to all the parts of the passage that Zakir Naik deliberately left out? The scroll contains a message about God's judgment on Jerusalem in 701 BC. Zakir Naik twists the verse so much that he declares that Muhammad is the only possible fulfillment.
This prophecy fulfills no one but the last and final messenger, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Now, once again, in a spirit of generosity, I'm going to grant what Zakir Naik says. I'm going to grant that Isaiah 29:12 is talking about Muhammad. By granting that this verse is talking about Muhammad, as Zakir Naik claims, we learn three important things. First, Muhammad was spiritually blind and in total rebellion against God. Isaiah 29:12 says nothing about a prophet receiving a book. It's about people who are spiritually blind rejecting God's message. Zakir Naik says that this is about Muhammad. Wonderful. So according to Zakir Naik, Muhammad stands condemned for his spiritual blindness and his willful rebellion against God. Second, Isaiah 29:12 isn't about a prophet, but Naik claims that it's about a prophet anyway. If we grant what Naik claims, then we have to ask, what about the other prophet in this passage? Obviously, if the person who's told to read the scroll and says, "I don't know how to read," is a prophet, then the person who's told to read the scroll and says, "I can't, it's sealed," must also be a prophet, right? If being told to read the book means that you're a prophet, then this passage predicts two different prophets. One who says, "I can't read," and the other who says, "I can't," because it's sealed. So, where's the prophet who was told to read the book but couldn't because the book was sealed? He hasn't come yet, which means that he's coming in the future, which means that there's another prophet after Muhammad, which means that the Quran is a lie because it says that Muhammad was the final prophet. Hence, if this passage is talking about prophets, Islam is false. Thank you, Zakir Naik, for giving us yet another reason to conclude that the Quran is wrong. Third, in verses 13 and 14, God talks about the people who reject his revelations in verses 11 and 12. But remember, according to Zakir Naik, verse 12 is about Muhammad. So what does God say about Muhammad, according to Zakir Naik? The Lord says, "These people," i.e. the spiritually blind people, including Muhammad, who stubbornly reject God's revelations, "come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is based on merely human rules they have been taught." They honor God with their lips, but their hearts are far from God. Their worship consists of following a set of rules. Sound like any religion we know? One where they memorize prayers in a language many of them don't even speak, pretend they're fasting while gorging themselves twice per day, walk circles around a giant pagan cube, mindlessly following rules that they've been taught? How is God going to punish them for their false worship? Next verse. "Therefore, once more I will astound these people with wonder upon wonder. The wisdom of the wise will perish. The intelligence of the intelligent will vanish." Their punishment is that the wisdom of the wise will perish and the intelligence of the intelligent will vanish. In other words, they'll become complete morons. Now think about this, because this is just too perfect. In Isaiah 29:12, spiritually blind people use their illiteracy as an excuse for rebelling against God's warnings. Zakir Naik not only claims that this is about Muhammad, he claims that Muhammad is the only one who fulfills this prophecy.
This prophecy fulfills no one but the last and final messenger, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
God goes on to condemn the spiritually blind, illiterate rebels for worshiping God by mindlessly following a set of rules, which is precisely what Muhammad did and what he taught his followers to do. God's punishment is to remove their wisdom and intelligence, turning them into complete idiots. Zakir Naik reads this passage, and he's too stupid to realize that the passage is condemning and mocking these spiritually blind people. So Naik tells his audience, this is about Islam. This is about our prophet. This is about us. And Naik's fans are so shockingly ignorant that they shout Allahu Akbar when he tells them that a passage about spiritual blindness, rebellion, and false worship is all about Islam. And the saddest part is that when I tell Muslims what the passage actually says, and that Zakir Naik is making Muslims look like complete fools, they don't get mad at Naik. They get mad at me, forcing me to conclude that they're not really interested in truth or reality. My Muslim friends, there are only two possibilities here. Either Isaiah chapter 29 verse 12 is a prophecy about Muhammad, in which case it's not saying that he's a prophet, it's saying that he was in rebellion against God and that God judged him by giving him a lobotomy. Or Isaiah chapter 29 verse 12 is not about Muhammad, in which case we have to wonder why Islam's top apologists keep embarrassing themselves and their followers and their religion by claiming that it is. So which is it, my Muslim friends? Let me know in the comments section.